If you think evolution only makes things better, well, you're about to have a rough 20-ish minutes. Nature has been hitting the undo button on species for millions of years, and honestly, the results are wild. We've got moths that can't eat, fish that throw away their tails, and jellyfish that can literally age in reverse when things get tough. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 times nature hit the undo button. 25. Sea squirts eat their own brains. Sea squirts start life looking like tiny tadpoles, complete with a basic brain, an eye spot, and a stiff little tail for swimming around. They use all of that gear to find a nice rock or dock to attach to. And then, once they settle in permanently, they do something absolutely wild. They digest their own brain. The spinal cord goes too. The whole nervous system gets broken down and recycled for nutrients because, well, why keep a brain if you're not ever going to move again? Maintaining brain tissue takes a lot of energy, and for a creature that has decided to become a living filter stuck to a rock for the rest of its life, thinking is an unnecessary expense. 24. Male fig wasps gave up wings and eyes. Male fig wasps are born inside a fig, mate inside the fig, and never leave the fig. Their entire existence plays out in total darkness inside a single piece of fruit. Because of that lifestyle, evolution gradually stripped away everything they didn't need. Wings? Gone. Eyes? Also gone. These guys are completely blind and flightless, and they're perfectly fine with it. All that energy that would have gone in building working eyes and functional wings gets rerouted straight into reproduction instead. Females still have both because they actually need to fly out and find new figs. But for the males, their job starts and ends inside that dark little fruit. They don't even live long enough for it to matter. 23. Caecilians ditched their legs entirely. If you've never heard of a Caecilian, that's fair. They look like oversized earthworms, but they're actually amphibians related to frogs and salamanders. Way back in the evolutionary timeline, the animals that would become Caecilians walked around on fully functional legs, just like their cousins still do today. But as Caecilians adapted to burrowing through soil and leaf litter, legs became more of a problem than a solution. Try squeezing yourself down a narrow dirt passage with all four limbs catching on everything around you. Not ideal. So, evolution got rid of them entirely. Caecilians are now completely limbless with smooth, streamlined bodies built for pushing through dirt. They even developed little tentacle-like sensors near their heads to help them find prey underground, since their eyes aren't much use down there either. 22. Aphids that turn off their own wings. Most people don't realize that aphids can essentially choose whether or not to grow wings. When food is everywhere and the environment is stable, a lot of aphid populations produce wingless offspring on purpose. No wings means no energy wasted on building flight muscles, and all of that saved fuel goes straight into making more aphids. Fast. Populations can explode in no time. But when conditions go sideways and the colony needs to relocate, winged aphids start showing up again. It's a biological switch that flips back and forth depending on the situation, and it's a surprisingly flexible trick for such a tiny bug. 21. Stick insects brought males back from the dead. For millions of years, certain stick insect species got along just fine without males. Females reproduced on their own through parthenogenesis, which is a fancy way of saying they essentially cloned themselves. Males were completely unnecessary, and over time, they just stopped appearing. Then, out of nowhere, males started showing up again in some populations. The genetic instructions for producing males had been sitting dormant the whole time. When conditions shifted and genetic diversity became useful again, those buried instructions switched back on. Even traits that have been missing for thousands of years can make a comeback if the right genes are still quietly hanging around in the background. 20. Silk moths forgot how to survive on their own. Domesticated silk moths are what happened when humans hijack evolution for thousands of years. We bred them for one thing only, making silk. Everything else fell apart along the way. Modern silk moths can't fly. Many of them can't even eat as adults because their mouth parts are non-functional. They survive entirely on fat reserves stored up during the caterpillar stage, and without human help, they'd vanish within a single generation. Their wings still technically exist, but they're too small and weak to get the moth off the ground. Thousands of years of selective breeding turned a fully capable insect into something that can't feed itself, can't take flight, and can't reproduce without us placing them together by hand. These animals are completely dependent on people for every stage of their life cycle, making them one of the most extreme examples of artificial selection you'll ever see. 19. Pygmy Pipehorses traded armor for invisibility. Pygmy Pipehorses are tiny relatives of seahorses, and they've shed a surprising amount of the skeletal complexity their bigger cousins carry around. Their bones are simplified, their bodies are miniaturized, and the whole package is designed for one thing: disappearing. A predator swimming past a pygmy pipehorse has almost zero chance of spotting it because the thing looks exactly like the coral and seagrass it clings to. Less bone means less structural strength. But when your entire survival strategy depends on not being noticed, you don't need to be tough, you need to be invisible. And these little guys have absolutely nailed that trade-off. 18. Bone-eating worms that threw out the whole digestive system. Osedax worms live at the bottom of the ocean and make their living off whale carcasses that sink to the sea floor. And they do it without a mouth, stomach, or anything resembling a digestive tract. Instead, they grow rod-like structures that burrow directly into whale bones. Symbiotic bacteria living inside those roots handle the heavy lifting, breaking down fats and proteins so the worm can absorb nutrients directly. It's a completely custom feeding system built for a food source nobody else can easily access. A dead whale on the ocean floor is an all-you-can-eat buffet, but only if you've got the right equipment. Osedax tossed out the entire conventional rulebook on how an animal is supposed to eat and replaced it with something weirder and way more effective for their niche. 17. The jellyfish that stopped breathing. In 2020, scientists confirmed something about Heneguia seminicola that rewrote a pretty basic rule of animal biology. This tiny parasite, related to jellyfish, has no mitochondria. For anyone who slept through that chapter in school, mitochondria are the little cellular engines that turn oxygen into energy. Every known animal on the planet has them, except this one. H. seminicola lives inside fish, tucked away in low oxygen environments where the traditional energy system would be useless anyway. So over time, it lost the whole setup. It's the only known multicellular animal that survives without oxygen, and its discovery forced scientists to rethink some very fundamental assumptions about what counts as an animal. 16. The Benjamin Button comb jelly. Comb jellies were already weird. Then, in late 2024, researchers found out they can also age backward. When an adult gets stressed, injured, or starts starving, it can reverse its own development and shrink back down to its larval form. Not just smaller, an entirely different life stage. An entirely different life stage, complete with different feeding structures suited for surviving on less food. Once conditions improve, it grows up all over again. Only one other animal has ever been documented pulling off something this extreme: the famous immortal jellyfish, Turritopsis dornii. For the comb jelly, life isn't a one-way trip. If things get rough, it just hits rewind and starts over. 15. The ghost plant quits sunlight for good. Monotropa uniflora looks nothing like a plant. It's completely white and waxy and grows in the darkest corners of the forest floors where barely any light reaches the ground. That ghostly appearance isn't an accident. This plant abandoned chlorophyll entirely, which means it has zero ability to photosynthesize. So how does it eat? It taps into fungal networks buried in the soil, the same networks that connect tree roots underground, and siphons off nutrients from nearby trees without contributing anything in return. The trees do the work, the fungi move the goods, and the ghost plant shows up like an uninvited guest who never brings anything to the potluck. It thrives in places where any normal plant would starve, and that's precisely because it stopped trying to play by normal plant rules a long time ago. 14. Dodder lost everything but the hustle. Dodder is a parasitic vine that has no roots, no leaves, and absolutely no ability to make its own food. What it does have is a tangle of thin orange threads that look like someone tossed a plate of spaghetti onto a bush. Those threads can actually detect chemical signals given off by nearby plants, allowing Dodder to sniff out its next meal before even making contact. Once it finds a host, it wraps around the stem and punches in tiny feeding tubes that drain moisture and nutrients straight from the source. The host plant does all the hard work. Dodder just takes. It shed every standard feature evolution gave it and replaced the lot with one brutally effective strategy: find something alive and latch on. 13. Balanophora looks like a mushroom, but it's definitely a plant. Balanophora might be the most confusing organism on this list. It pokes up from the forest floor looking exactly like a small mushroom, but genetically, it is 100% plant. Somewhere along the line, it ditched its leaves, its roots, and any chance of making food from sunlight. All that's left is a fleshy tuber that latches onto nearby tree roots and steals everything it needs to grow. What makes it even stranger is what scientists found in its DNA. It had shed enormous chunks of its genome compared to other plants, throwing out genes for traits it no longer uses. Most organisms accumulate genetic material over time. This one has been doing the opposite, actively trimming itself down to the bare minimum needed for parasitic lifestyle. It's one of the most stripped down plants on the planet, and it's doing just fine precisely because it went all in and never looked back. 12. Grenadiers traded a real tail for a rodent tail. Most fish have broad, muscular tails built for speed. Grenadiers went a completely different direction. These deep-sea fish evolved long, thin, tapering tail filaments that trail behind them like a slowly fading signal, earning them the nickname rat tails. Down in the deep ocean where food is scarce and every calorie matters, a big, powerful tail would be a waste. Grenadiers don't need to chase anything down. They drift slowly through the dark, scanning for whatever scraps come their way, and that skinny tail lets them do it while burning almost nothing. It's not a glamorous look, but at 1,000 feet below the surface, nobody's winning any beauty contests anyway. 11. Golden moles decided they didn't need to see anymore. Golden moles spend their entire lives underground in Africa, and somewhere along the way, their eyes just stopped working. Their eyelids are permanently fused closed and covered with a layer of fur and skin, turning the eyes into useless little lumps buried beneath the surface of their faces. What they lost in vision, they more than made up for with everything else. Golden moles have incredibly sensitive hearing, finely tuned touch receptors, and the ability to pick up vibrations traveling through the ground itself. They can feel an insect moving through the dirt from a surprising distance, which is far more practical than eyesight would ever be when you live in complete blackness. 10. Sloths weren't always small. Modern sloths are small, slow, and spend almost all their time dangling from branches eating leaves. Their ancestors were a completely different animal. Ancient ground sloths were among the largest land mammals in the Americas, with some species weighing several tons and walking upright on the ground. They could strip trees bare and hold their own against most predators just by being massive. Over millions of years, the lineage that survived shrank dramatically. Smaller bodies needed fewer calories. In a world where food sources kept shifting, being able to live on almost nothing is a serious advantage. Tree sloths today burn so little energy that they only need to come down from the canopy about once a week. And that stripped down lifestyle is exactly why they're still around, while their giant relatives are not. 9. Elephant shrews are cousins of actual elephants. Elephant shrews look like mice with unusually long noses, and nothing about their appearance suggests they'd be related to anything bigger than a hamster. But genetically, their closest family members on the Tree of Life are elephants, manatees, and aardvarks. Millions of years ago, they all shared a common ancestor. While one branch of that family tree grew into the largest land animals on Earth, this one went the complete opposite direction. Elephant shrews are tiny, fast, and agile. Their compact size keeps them under the radar of most predators. Their long noses sniff out insects with sharp precision, and their quick legs carry them through dense brush at surprising speed. Same genetic roots as an elephant, completely different answer to the question of how to survive. 8. Dark-eyed Juncos changed their beaks, then changed them back. Between 2020 and 2025, scientists in Los Angeles watched something play out in real time that most people assume takes thousands of years. Dark-eyed Juncos, a common songbird, started developing longer and slimmer beaks, likely in response to shifting food sources during the pandemic lockdowns. Then, just a few generations later, the beaks reverted right back to their original, shorter, stubbier shape. That's a full evolutionary cycle, adaptation, and reversal happening within 5 years. The Juncos proved that natural selection can work fast and doesn't always commit to its first draft. When conditions change, so do the birds. And when conditions change back, so do they. 7. Sticklebacks that keep rewriting their own blueprints. There's a rule in evolutionary biology called Dollo's Law, and it says that once a complex trait is lost, it can never come back. Three-spined sticklebacks apparently never heard of this. These small fish have repeatedly gained heavy armor plating, lost it, and then gained it again across different lakes and rivers around the world, all depending on local predators and water conditions. The variation from one group to the next is so dramatic that early researchers actually thought they were looking at dozens of entirely distinct animals. They weren't. It's all the same fish, just responding differently to whatever each specific environment throws at them. Sticklebacks have become one of the biggest examples in biology of how flexible and reversible evolution can actually be. 6. Ichthyosaurs revisited. Old hunting methods. Ichthyosaurs dominated ancient oceans as enormous reptiles built for speed and power. The earliest members of the group were apex predators that tackled large prey. But over time, most of the lineage shifted to feeding on smaller fish and squid. For tens of millions of years, that seemed to be the final answer. Then, Caecilians saccharum showed up. Fossils from what is now Colombia revealed a skull packed with multiple tooth shapes designed for both crushing and slicing. Exactly the kind of setup an animal needs to take on large, tough prey again. After millions of years of eating small stuff, this ichthyosaur had clawed its way back to the top of the food chain. Unlike the fast reversals we see in modern birds and fish, this one played out over an incredibly long stretch of time, proving that evolution's undo button doesn't always work quickly. 5. Liolaemus lizards can't make up their minds. High up in the Andes Mountains, Liolaemus lizards have been going back and forth between two completely different ways of having babies. The original species laid eggs. Then, as the mountains pushed higher and temperatures dropped, egg laying became dangerous because cold conditions made it tough for eggs to survive outside the body. So, many populations switched to live birth, keeping the young warm internally until they were ready for the world. That alone would be interesting enough, but some Liolaemus populations that later moved to warmer, lower elevations switched right back to laying eggs again. Scientists can trace the flips on the family tree, and the switch has happened multiple times in different branches. Nobody fully understands how a lizard's body can pull off that kind of reversal at a biological level. Changing from egg laying to live birth involves major internal change to how the reproductive system works, and reversing all of that is supposed to be extraordinarily unlikely. But the fact that they do it at all proves that even something as complex as reproduction isn't necessarily a permanent decision. 4. Brachymeles lizards grew back a lost body part. Brachymeles lizards from Southeast Asia spent millions of years evolving into legless, snake-like burrowers. Their limbs and toes disappeared gradually as they adapted to life underground, which is a pretty standard story in evolution. What happened next is anything but standard. When some habitats changed and surface movement became useful again, certain Brachymeles populations re-evolved functional toes and legs, full digits, working limbs, ready to walk after millions of years without them. According to the textbooks, this shouldn't be possible. Complex structures like legs, once lost, are supposed to be gone for good. These lizards didn't get that memo, and they've become one of the most direct challenges to the idea that evolution is a one-way road. 3. A frog grew back teeth. This one might be the most jaw-dropping reversal on the entire list. Around 230 million years ago, frogs as a group lost their lower teeth. Every species, across the board. For over 200 million years, no frog on Earth had teeth on its lower jaw. Then, Gunther's marsupial frog quietly grew them back. Scientists estimate that teeth reappeared about 20 million years ago, which means this species sat toothless for roughly 200 million years before reversing course. The likely reason is diet. This frog eats other frogs, and having a full set of teeth makes it a lot harder for a meal to wriggle free. Whatever genetic instructions were needed to build lower teeth had been buried in the DNA the entire time, just waiting for the right reason to fire up again. 200 million years is an almost incomprehensible amount of time to sit on a dormant trait, but the blueprint was there. All it took was the right pressure to bring it back. 2. the bird that evolved the same way twice. The Aldabra rail is a flightless bird living on the Aldabra Atoll in the Indian Ocean. Fossils confirm that a flightless rail existed on those islands around 136,000 years ago. Then the atoll was completely submerged by rising seas and everything on it was wiped out. After the land resurfaced, a flying relative called the white-throated rail recolonized the islands from nearby Madagascar. And over roughly 20,000 years, those flying birds lost the ability to fly all over again, ending up in nearly the same flightless form as the species that had been wiped out tens of thousands of years earlier. Same island, same pressures, same result. Evolution ran the same experiment twice and landed on the same answer both times. Scientists call it iterative evolution, and the Aldabra rail is one of the cleanest examples of it ever documented. Nature didn't just hit undo on this one. It was copy and pasted. 1. The human artery that refuses to disappear. And finally, for our last entry, this one hits close to home. Literally. There's a blood vessel running through your forearm called the median artery. When you're still developing before birth, the artery feeds blood to your growing hand. In most people, it fades away as two other vessels, one on each side of the wrist, take over that job permanently. That's been the standard human setup for a long time. But something's shifting. In the late 1800s, about 10% of adults still had their median artery. By the late 1900s, that number jumped to around 30%, and scientists now predict that if the trend continues, nearly every human on the planet could have one by 2100. That means a step that was supposed to happen during development, the artery going away, is occurring less and less frequently. Nobody is entirely sure why. It might give people better blood flow to the hand, or it might be a neutral change that's just sticking around because there's no reason to get rid of it. Either way, you're looking at evolution happening right now, in the bodies of people alive today. And you might even be carrying the evidence in your own arm. And that's 25 times nature decided that forward wasn't the only option. From frogs regrowing teeth they lost 200 million years ago, to a bird that literally evolved the same way twice, the rules of evolution are clearly more like loose suggestions. Do you know a fun fact about evolution that would shock your fellow viewer? Share it with the class in the comments. And if you want to keep going down the rabbit hole, click here for 25 unsolved mysteries of evolution. As always, like, share, comment, subscribe with that notification bell so you never miss out on any new content, and I will catch you in the next one.